Look, I know what you're thinking, it's some standard clickbait title, but this actually happened. Weirdly enough, the actual story seemed too far-fetched to put in a title. Some of you have been here for a while now, and I figured I'd give you guys a personal lore drop. Also, it's a little test to see what kind of other content works. Let's set the scene, because my English teacher always said something about establishing the setting for your story. For about a week or so spread between December and January, I took a drive down to Florida. One of my favorite things about Florida has always been the wildlife, whether it be in paddleboarding through the mangroves or observing the local crystal enthusiast outside the gas station. In this instance, I decided it best to choose the option behind door number 1. On this particular day, I ended up at a park that I recall being named Silver Springs, but I could be mixing the words up with a retirement home I saw along the way. This park has a tributary running through it, and it advertises things such as manatees, alligators, turtles, just normal Florida stuff. This park also has the option of taking a tour by waterway, which sounded right up my alley as soon as they mentioned a self-guided option. There's no real safety precautions beyond put on a life jacket and sign this waiver agreeing that should anything happen to you, it's your fault. I'm an individual who's always been a touch on the taller side of things, so I don't fit into kayaks very well. And that prior summer, I was fortunate enough to learn I had an affinity for paddleboarding. That information will be important later. I set out on a course plotted on a map I had been shown prior to stepping atop my board, and so far, nothing really remarkable has happened as I'm traveling through the main waterway. One thing I did begin to notice was the apparent lack of ability in regard to the control most others seem to have over their assorted kayaks and canoes. It wasn't anything that seemed unsafe at the time, it was simply folks just bumbling around in an unfamiliar environment. Another thing I made a mental note of was the abundance of orange signs scattered around the waterways reading things like, "Warning, don't go in the water," or some of them literally just being a giant alligator silhouette. I never felt uneasy necessarily, but I did feel out of place, seeing as everyone else had shells around them, and I'm on a large floating potato chip. Then out of the blue, any judgment about how others were conducting themselves was suddenly purged from my body upon entering the main portion of the waterway, because across from me, I saw 3 alligators no less than 6 feet apiece, basking on the banks. I'll take this moment to teach you something. Reptiles are cold-blooded, and therefore they are often sluggish in the cold, which is why most of the time they're seen sunbathing like a Beverly Hills trophy wife. Last I checked, Florida is the only place in the world where both alligators and crocodiles overlap populations. Despite both being opportunistic predators inclined to prey upon weak and injured animals, meaning they are drawn to movement like thrashing in the water, you may see where that comes in later, they have their differences. Alligators are box-faced, relatively chill dinosaurs, and crocodiles are triangular-faced machines perfected by evolution to destroy hope. Another fun fact, you cannot distinguish the two from 50 yards away with sun glare, which is exactly why I got 15 yards away instead. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming. I'm not too worried about the alligators, as it seems uncharacteristically chilly, for Florida at least. I'm far more focused on the fact that I have yet to see the manatees I was promised upon arriving. In an effort to ignore the affront against my humanity, yes, it is a human rights violation should you not deliver manatees unto those you promised them to. I carry on drifting with the current and admiring the scenery. I see more alligators, some schools of carp, enough turtles for Master Splinter to create an army with, and then I come across a man trying to get my attention. I look this man in the eyes, and despite him speaking in broken English, an effort which I wholeheartedly commend, I already knew what he had seen. As he points upriver, I see them surface. The fabled marine potatoes, the sea cows, the manatees. I was elated. I, as a grown man, became enveloped in a childlike wonder towards these fascinating creatures. I couldn't help myself but to gently paddle alongside them and observe these animals for quite some time, as I wasn't sure if I'd ever get the opportunity again. And that's where our story ends, right? Everything I wanted was now mine, and I happily cruised back to the entry point. Come now, you know me better than that. As I was promised manatees, you were promised someone's life in danger. And don't you worry, I intend to deliver. As I accompany the manatees along their underwater voyage, I spy with my little eye commotion off in the distance. I'm under the impression this means there are more of my friendly aquatic acquaintances parading about upriver. I bid adieu to my newfound friends and proceed to swiftly make my way to the group of kayaks I see formed in a semicircle. Once I get closer, I notice one of these things is not like the other. Everybody seems fine, but as I get closer yet, their movement reads frantic, and I still can't put my finger on what's wrong. At this point, I've identified something is amiss, and now I'm really steaming towards them. Then the realization finally hits me. One of these kayaks no longer has a passenger. I'm finally close enough to see what's wrong, and I find a young man has capsized and is clinging to not only an overturned but sinking kayak for dear life. To make matters worse, he's a rather large individual who doesn't seem to know how to swim. As if that wasn't enough, he's put his life jacket on incorrectly so that it's no longer keeping his entire body above water, but instead dunking his head back under should he try to let go of the kayak. Let us take another brief aside for a moment. All things considered, it's a great park, and I recommend you should go should you ever be in the area. However, see to it that you're familiar operating something with a paddle first. Once again, back to your regularly scheduled programming. I apologize for the interruption. To this day, I have no idea what compelled me to jump in that water. For the most part, I suppose I should credit my mother for teaching me that any decision is better than no decision. In all honesty, I would love to say something heroic, but it felt like my mind went completely blank and my body just went into autopilot. The only thing that mattered in that moment was this gentleman's safety. I dove in, I grabbed him by the back of his collar so he could let go of the kayak, and I could drag him without his head going under. English wasn't his strong suit, but to give credit where it's due, he had said something around the lines of current. If he hadn't said that, it wouldn't have clicked in my brain that I was about to fight the river to go to a nearby sandbar. If he hadn't said that word, I would have been just as stuck as him and completely exhausted, if not more, leaving two people for someone to drag out of the water. As I said, I have no idea why I jumped in, but I do know exactly what compelled me to decide it was a good idea to hook my arm under his sinking kayak and drag that through the water to safety as well. I could see the fear in this man's eyes, not of death, not of getting eviscerated by reptiles, but instead of his mother, who would have to pay for a kayak that sank because he fell out. Fear I know all too well. I have him above water with my left hand, and I have my right now hooked within the underwater kayak hole, and I don't know where I'm going, but I just started slowly kicking my feet, making sure they were completely underwater, partially coming to my senses at this time, and deathly afraid of what might happen should I splash them above it. My current hope is get us to the banks, work it out from there, but it's not looking good because these are just sheer drop-offs. I propel us along for what felt like 15 minutes, but it was probably more closer to 1, and I look over my shoulder to see some branches of a tree that had fallen in the water quite some time ago. I'm able to put that together because the branches are dead and they're bone dry at the top, and there's an algae pool forming around them. If I was even an inch shorter, I wouldn't have been able to rest the tips of my toes on the base of that tree, but as soon as I did, my heart sank. It didn't cross my mind what the tree would feel like, but I can't describe it any better than saying this tree, with its waterlogged bark covered in algae, felt exactly like one in my head standing on top of an alligator would feel like. I am now violently jerked back into the reality of the situation I have put myself in. I have no idea what I'm standing on, but I am determined to see that at least one of us makes it out of here. I have one of the bystanders of their group that was holding my paddleboard floated over, and I helped pull him over the front of it. Then, in a motion that, quite frankly, destroyed my shoulders for the next few days, I was able to lift his now completely submerged kayak mostly out of the water with my newly freed hands and pour enough out so that it may be buoyant again. I have now spent enough time tentatively standing atop this log that I am fairly safe in my assumption it's nothing more than a tree. I am now able to hoist myself upon the back of my board and take solace in the fact that I am no longer neck deep in murky water. A kind boat passes by after a few minutes, and we are able to fully dump the kayak out, get him back inside, and escort him to safety. We made it back, and I had 10 minutes left to spare until the 2-hour limit that the board was rented out for. But not before passing those 3 basking alligators once more and thanking them for letting me walk into their house and come out unharmed. At the end of everything, no matter how many times I think about this, I'm always left with one burning question. How the hell did this guy find his kayak paddle again? I mean, seriously, I saw the dude's hands the entire time, and not once was there a paddle in them. There wasn't a handoff or anything either. It's like he summoned the goddamn thing out of sheer tyranny of will. I have never been more dumbfounded in my life. Well, that's my story. Hope you liked it. There's usually a lesson at the end of these, so I'll make this one quick. Doing something courageous is not done in the absence of fear. It's being consumed by fear and powering through regardless of that. If you think for a second I wasn't afraid, you're dead wrong. I'm just stupid. All I did was recognize that something had to be done, and in that circumstance, I was the only one who was gonna do it. Today's lesson isn't sacrifice yourself for someone else. It's stand up, look your fears in the eye, and tell them they don't get to own you. If this video falls flatter than a plate full of piss, I'll take that as a sign to lay off of these in the future. They're probably not going to be all that common anyway, but I wanted to try this now in case I ever need content but I'm running short on ideas. That's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the story, and thank you for spending some time with me, as always. You guys take care and have a good night.